This video will be focused on identity. I've talked about it before, but I aim to organize the ideas better and have a single video dedicated to the topic. To begin with identity, I want to start by defining what identity means to me. My version of identity is the set of beliefs and values you hold intrinsically that influence your behavior in the external world. I'm going to begin by talking about how identity actually influences your behavior. And one of the first ways that it manages to, have that impact in your life, it's pretty much the core principal element that it kind of influences every aspect of your life. But one of the ways is that it defines how you respond to negative external feedback. What that means is when others try to maybe say something mean to you or something negative happens within your life, maybe you're working on something and you're not really seeing results, then your identity, depending on the sort of set of beliefs and values you hold, the framework you've built up based on how things have existed for you, how things have turned out for you, then that's going to heavily impact what your response is going to be. And this is quite important because your response sort of steers the direction of your life. If you have a low identity, so a poor set of values and beliefs, which means you react poorly and impulsively, instinctively, then you might be more susceptible to giving into your emotions, and that's going to influence your relationships with other people, and it could influence your job, your physique, your health. It kind of influences everything. This is why it's crucial that you have a high self-identity, a high perception of yourself. One of the key aspects and the reasons why identity is actually quite important as well, I mentioned this earlier, is it's how you respond to lack of results. This is very crucial because most things are usually set within a long period, a long-term time frame, where in the beginning, for a long period of time, in the short term, you're not going to get much results. And how well you succeed is how well you adapt to those lack of results, and especially whether or not you can keep going with the lack of results. If you're running a business or you're trying to go to the gym or you're trying to run consistently or something and you don't see any results for the next 2 to 3 months, that can be highly demotivating. And depending on the identity that you have, that's going to decide how you respond to those lack of results. And when you respond poorly, you're more likely to give up that thing and then wonder why you're still stuck, doing the same bad habits and struggling to do the positive ones. And it also influences how you work. Whenever you struggle to do work, that might not be as much related to how disciplined you are necessarily, or, all the systems. Like you could have everything set up in place. But if you have a low identity and you believe the work doesn't really lead you anywhere because you've had past feedback of low results and you just believe you're somebody who doesn't do work, that you struggle, that you're lazy, that's going to heavily influence whether or not you're going to be able to do the work, especially if you have other responsibilities within your life that are naturally draining and exhaustive of your energy. Then when it's required of you to actually act on the work, you maybe were a bit excited at first, you're interested in improving your life to begin with, but when the time comes, you find that you can't do the work, and that's probably related to your identity. It's not consciously decided necessarily as much because you're probably unaware of how identity was even influencing you in the first place, let alone that you have a specific type of identity beyond just, your basic surface level of understanding of it. But it's also how you respond when the time comes around to do the work. If you believed you were capable, and especially if you have proven it beforehand that you can sit down and do the work when it's necessary, then you automatically are infinitely more likely to actually get the work done. And why is it important to get the work done in the first place? Because it's the driving force of whether you become successful or not. It's the energy, the moving force, and your identity influences that, which means it influences one of the most important aspects of your success. I also covered how it impacts how impulsive you are, which can be very negative because, when there's moments where you have to be composed within your own emotions and you have to be professional and serious, if you are impulsive with your emotions, then you can significantly and negatively impact your life. It can be the difference between whether in a meeting, you cave into your pressure because you believe yourself. If, for example, if you believe you're an anxious, negative person within the interview, you may think you can put on a mask and pretend that you're more confident than you really are and that you're more capable. But usually the subconscious cues that your brain generates, it acts in a certain way that that you're not aware of that's going to influence your chances of succeeding with your goal. You think you're not nervous, but then if you bounce your knee without realizing it, that's quite a fast giveaway then. It also influences how patient you are. So this relates to when I was speaking about the lack of results. So when you have an identity about how patient you are, you believe you're impatient, then you're naturally going to start to just avoid doing long-term tasks. And, you're going to also be more impulsive and just do more negative sort of actions. I mean, like I said, whenever you cover all of this, I'm only covering a small percentage of things, but to put it into perspective, identity practically influences every aspect of yourself, because identity is practically the main thing. It's the target thing that you're shifting within self-improvement to begin with. The journey you're on is a metamorphosis of your identity, the undesirable identity to the desired identity, beyond just the external, of course, and the reality of who you are as well, not just how you believe you are, how you frame yourself. But that's very crucial and important. I'm also going to mention then how identity is actually developed and programmed into you. And a lot of people might not realize this, but it actually starts quite early, most of it. You're probably not consciously aware of the identity that's been built into you. A good section and part of that has been developed throughout your childhood. Now, of course, you could argue the school system and everything would have had a massive influence on that, because they want to design you to be an ideal sort of worker who doesn't try to leave the domain of what's set as achievable. But besides this, there's also how everybody interacted with you within your childhood. And, it could be just as simple as teacher says something negative to you, and now you have set that in stone as sort of almost evidence, like factual evidence that this is who you are. Subconsciously, you start to make those connections and you start to believe you are that specific type of person. It doesn't mean it's true. It's just how your brain has subjectively experienced and perceived that sort of feedback from the external world, and hence it has decided to adopt it internally, which then influences the rest of your external behavior until you become aware of it and then control it. For as long as the conscious mind remains unaware of the unconscious mind, it will call that unconscious mind fate. Besides this, your current reality also influences it. As much as your past has had a significant influence and has set the main roots and crystallized that concept and idea of who you are, your environment currently influences it. When you come home and whether or not your environment is tidy or messy, what you wear and, the people you interact with on a daily basis, what you do on a daily basis, these all are constant reinforcements of your identity. Your brain looks at the external mostly to try and dictate its identity. It's got its main rooted identity, 90% of it from the past events and the past feedback. But there's also the 10%, which is the current reality. And that can shift and change. And over time, you can actually overcome the rooted past beliefs of yourself, though it's extremely difficult. Regardless of the beliefs you have about it, it's very difficult and takes many years of time and overwhelming evidence. But your external environment heavily influences your identity as well. It's as simple as what other people tell you sort of shifts who you are. You might even notice you act differently depending on the people you talk to. You might act differently to your friends, to how you interact with your coworkers or your boss. But these people and the environment clearly show you how they influence you. All you have to do is go to a different place and you see how the environment influences you. So if you want to be able to shift your identity, one of the crucial ways is going to be by changing your environment as much as possible to align it with the desired identity that you have. And of course, one of the most crucial aspects of your identity and how it's built into you is your current actions and evidence. And of course, the most crucial aspect of how your identity is influenced is the actions you take and your external evidence in general. So your habits and your general behaviors, while they're automatic, mostly, right? Unless you become aware of them, like right now, maybe you have become aware of them, but you probably might have been aware before. Regardless, the actions you take on a consistent basis heavily influence your identity as well. If you perform negative habits on a consistent basis and have no prior evidence of resisting those negative habits and engaging in positive habits, you're going to create a overwhelming catalog of evidence that crushes your belief that you're anyone capable of achieving work. To override that, because it's very difficult at first to take any action when you have this heavy set identity built into you that you're somebody incapable of doing work and incapable of changing their life. In order to change this, you need to take the minimum possible amount of action and then consistently try, consistency is more important than perfection here. But over time, over a few years, you can start to develop evidence, start to compound in your action, and then you can start to build the identity that way. So I'm going to now focus purely then on how to shift the identity. I was talking about this a bit earlier, but now I'm going to give direct points about how to actually change your identity. The first step that's most important is that you create an alter ego about the ideal version of yourself. You have to imagine a person who is ultimately capable of achieving all their goals and dreams. You might have to be a bit delusional and grandiose, not to an extent that's completely impossible and unrealistic of attaining. It needs to be possible within the realms of possibility while trying to focus on the upper, echelon of what you think you might be capable of. Try to just extend what you believe, because your belief can heavily influence that. Just try to push a little bit more while saying, yes, that could be possible, right? Think about it realistically. If you, showed up consistently, put in max effort, and, you acted a certain way around people to question whether that's possible, and then create that alter ego. That's going to be your target. That's what you're going to aim towards. And it's very important you create this. Once you've created that alter ego, you need to create a list of tasks that alter ego would perform on a daily basis. So it needs to be relatable to your current situation, because really what we're targeting is just focusing on what you're actually going to be doing now, what you need to be doing now, right? So if your alter ego suddenly possessed you, let's say, what would it be doing? What is the list of actions? Make sure to write it down and, make sure it's also possible again, but you can always stretch. You sometimes need to stretch that imagination of possibility as well, not too far, but to a level that, might feel slightly uncomfortable. And once you have this list, there's going to be your new target, which is to be following these tasks as consistently as possible. The more consistent you are in achieving them, the more evidence you're building up of the identity that you have, the ideal image, the alter ego. You want to prioritize consistency over perfection here. It doesn't matter if you work as hard as possible against your will and, you're burning in hell just to get it done. And you work nonstop for an entire week. If the next week, the next year, you just decide to do absolutely nothing because you burnt out and you can't be bothered anymore. Consistency is far more important over perfection, because that consistency eventually compounds, and the compounding is going to have far more impact and influence than any sort of initial short-term perfection you would have achieved. That perfection is an illusion and it should be avoided. The desired state is consistency. So when you become consistent with those tasks as much as possible, ideally, I guess 100%, that's the perfection, but like I said, don't chase perfection. That becomes evidence of the ideal identity. And once you have built overwhelming evidence, that evidence becomes your identity. You start to believe that you're capable, because your brain sees the past actions, it sees how you've changed, it sees that you're capable, and it becomes easier to perform tasks in the future. And hence it starts to influence every other aspect, especially as your identity starts to grow and compound and you start to believe in yourself more in other aspects. Now, this is the main way I would go about shifting identity, but there are other external ways you can sort of do immediately now. Whether or not these have an impact is, it depends on who you are. It works differently for different people, but this is just a few items that I can recommend that might help you out. One of those is to listen to empowering music. If you listen to negative music, that actively drains your energy without you realizing it. You think sometimes you want to express certain negative emotions by listening to negative music. It sounds like a good idea, but you're better off listening to either no music or listen to positive music. If you feel negative and you try to listen to empowering music and you find that it doesn't really resonate with your emotional, current state, it's better you just listen to no music then and just try to build up evidence and try to do something else to make yourself feel better. Because if you listen to negative music, it's just going to reinforce that negative belief about yourself. You're going to be put in a state of, low identity when you listen to that negative music. Better you listen to positive music. You listen to empowering music, because then it's almost, in a way, external evidence that builds up how you perceive yourself. And the other way, and this relates to your environment, which I was talking about earlier, is to talk to positive, like-minded people. The more people, although this is very, very difficult because the vast majority of people probably, if you're on a journey of self-improvement and you're trying to achieve something, most people are going to be against it, not just, maybe indifferent towards it, but straight up against it, Some people can be quite negative towards other people who try to improve. But if you can find like-minded people who are positive, this is one of the best ways probably to do it, because it's also continuously, it's a closed feedback loop where you're continuously gaining reinforcing evidence of how other people are doing this. They'll try to boost you up. You'll start doing more work, and then you encourage them, and then vice versa, until you start to build up that identity, that ideal image of yourself. Another way, which is sort of maybe seems a bit arbitrary, but it's quite important, is to not allow negative thoughts to enter your mind. It can be quite hard to control, especially when you're unaware in the moment, but the more control you have over your thoughts, the better. This sort of can relate to music, for example, because music influences your emotional state, and then hence it influences your thoughts that you currently have. So if you listen to positive music, it's a great way to start to feel and think more positively about yourself, right? And this sort of also relates to building up the positive evidence of your actions and everything, right? But, if you see points and states where, there's some kind of negative habit going on, maybe you might need to feel negative about it. Maybe it's positive in a way in order to change and shift. But if you find that negativity doesn't really do anything in terms of shifting you, and, it just drains you and puts you down, then you need to start prioritizing more positive thoughts. You need to prioritize having more positive thoughts. So honestly, like I said, this is going to probably more exist externally. Then you'll get those thoughts naturally. But if you can identify when you get negative thoughts and then try to put them away and replace them with positive thoughts, develop that kind of habit, that's also quite crucial and can be a really good way of building up the desired identity or the desired alter ego. So again, as I said earlier, and I was talking about environment here, you need to wear clothes that match the desired alter ego. This is one way you can do this. Depending on the clothes you wear and how hygienic and how well groomed you are, that can influence your self-perception of yourself, because that influences how other people perceive you, and our own identity is heavily dependent on the external. So, if you wear better clothes that make you feel like they're more comfortable fit, you look better, you get a haircut or something, then all of this influences your external image towards other people, and then build up kind of pretty much everything that helps, maybe a watch even, wear a watch or something. You create that external image, people treat you better based on that, and then that's going to reinforce your, the identity you want to have. As well as much as yourself, you will just feel better wearing the clothes you feel like your alter ego would wear if he possessed you, let's say. And then just generally speaking, make sure to just take care of your environment. As I said before, your entire environment heavily impacts what you believe about yourself. If you have a messy environment, you're going to think negatively of yourself, because you're going to think, I'm an untidy person who's disorganized and lazy. But if you have an organized environment, everything's clean, you can find everything wherever you need it, then that's going to boost your self-image. But that's going to be the whole topic of identity covered within a compressed format, maybe summarizing it or not, but I tried to put as much value as I can into that sort of compressed format. I tried not to talk more than what was necessary. I wanted to give as much value as possible without wasting time there. Understand, if you apply and learn what I've taught, it should have a genuinely positive impact. You have gained access to information that puts you in the top 10%. Follow for more content like this, like and comment to boost the algorithm, and share the message to others who need it.